The morning sun cast long shadows across the forecourt of Buckingham Palace as tourists began gathering for the famous changing of the guard ceremony. Among the crowd was Marcus Thompson, a 28-year-old American tourist who had been traveling through Europe for 3 weeks. He carried an expensive camera around his neck and wore a loud Hawaiian shirt that made him stand out among the more conservatively dressed British visitors. Marcus had always been the type of person who enjoyed being the center of attention. Back home in Chicago, his friends knew him as the guy who would dare to do anything for a laugh. He worked in social media marketing and understood the power of viral content. This trip to London was supposed to be the highlight of his European adventure, and he was determined to create content that would impress his followers back home. As he pushed his way closer to the palace gates, Marcus noticed the stoic royal guards standing at their posts. These were the famous Queen's Guard, easily recognizable in their distinctive red tunics and tall black bearskin hats. Each guard stood perfectly still, their faces expressionless beneath the shadow of their ceremonial headwear. Their rifles were held in precise position, and they maintained their poses despite the growing crowd of tourists taking photos and chattering excitedly around them. Marcus had heard stories about these guards before his trip. His research told him they were trained never to break character, no matter what happened around them. They were professional soldiers, many having served in active combat zones, but while on ceremonial duty, they were expected to remain motionless and silent like living statues. This information sparked an idea in Marcus's mind, one that he thought would make perfect content for his social media channels. He pulled out his phone and began recording a video for his Instagram story, speaking directly to the camera while gesturing toward the guards behind him. "Okay guys, so I'm here at Buckingham Palace and these guards are supposed to never move or react to anything. Let's see if that's really true." His voice carried an excited, mischievous tone that suggested he was planning something more than just taking photos. The crowd around him continued to grow as the ceremony time approached. Families with children pointed at the guards and whispered among themselves. Elderly couples took turns posing for photos with the palace in the background. Tour guides led groups of visitors, sharing historical facts about the royal residence and its famous inhabitants. Everyone seemed content to observe respectfully from behind the barriers that kept tourists at a safe distance from the guards and the palace entrance. But Marcus had different plans. He had noticed that while most tourists stayed behind the designated areas, there didn't seem to be any physical barriers preventing someone from getting closer to the guards themselves. Security cameras monitored the area, and police officers were stationed nearby, but they seemed focused on managing the growing crowd rather than watching individual tourists. As he studied the scene, Marcus formulated his plan. He would approach one of the guards directly, try to get a reaction, and film the entire encounter. In his mind, this would either result in a hilarious video of him successfully making a stoic guard break character, or an equally entertaining video of what happened when someone crossed the line at one of the world's most famous palaces. He adjusted his camera settings and made sure his phone was fully charged. The anticipation built in his chest as he imagined the views and likes his video would receive. His friends back home would be amazed that he had actually gone through with such a bold move. He pictured the comments praising his courage and humor, and maybe even news outlets picking up the story of the American tourist who dared to challenge the famous royal guards. Marcus took a deep breath and stepped forward, leaving the safety of the crowd behind him. He had no idea that within the next few minutes his European vacation would take a dramatic turn that he never could have anticipated. The guards he was about to encounter were not just ceremonial figures in costumes, but highly trained military personnel with very real authority to protect one of the most important buildings in the United Kingdom. The stage was set for a confrontation that would teach Marcus a lesson about respect, boundaries, and the serious nature of royal protocol. His phone was recording, the crowd was watching, and the guards remained motionless at their posts, unaware that their peaceful morning duty was about to be interrupted by an American tourist who thought he understood the rules of engagement at Buckingham Palace. Marcus walked confidently toward the nearest guard, his phone held high to capture every moment of what he believed would be his viral breakthrough. The guard he approached was Lance Corporal James Mitchell, a veteran of 2 tours in Afghanistan. who had been serving with the Grenadier Guards for over 6 years. Standing at 6 feet 2 inches tall, Mitchell was an imposing figure even without considering his military training and experience. As Marcus got closer, he began speaking loudly, both for his camera and in an attempt to get the guard's attention. "Hey there, buddy, beautiful morning, isn't it?" he called out cheerfully as if greeting an old friend. The guard remained motionless, his eyes fixed straight ahead in perfect military bearing. This was exactly what Marcus had expected, and it only encouraged him to push further. "I'm from Chicago," Marcus continued, circling around the guard while keeping his camera rolling. "Been hearing about you guys my whole life. They say you never move, never talk, never react to anything. Is that really true?" He waved his free hand in front of the guard's face, but Mitchell maintained his professional composure, trained to ignore such provocations. The tourists behind the barriers began to take notice of Marcus's behavior. Some pulled out their own phones to record what they sensed might become an interesting encounter. Others looked uncomfortable, recognizing that the American visitor was crossing boundaries that probably shouldn't be crossed. A few parents ushered their children away from the area, sensing that the situation might escalate. Marcus interpreted the guard's continued stillness as a personal challenge. In his mind, he was winning some sort of game where the objective was to break the guard's concentration. He had no understanding of the discipline and training required to maintain such composure, nor did he appreciate the respect and dignity that the position demanded. "Come on, give me something," Marcus pleaded, moving even closer to the guard. "Just a smile, a wink, anything. My followers back home will love this." He began making silly faces and gestures, completely oblivious to the fact that his behavior was being watched, not just by tourists, but by security personnel strategically positioned throughout the palace grounds. Lance Corporal Mitchell had dealt with difficult tourists before, but Marcus's persistent and increasingly aggressive behavior was testing even his well-trained patience. The guard's job required him to remain at his post and maintain dignity while representing the crown, but he was also trained to assess threats and respond appropriately when situations escalated beyond acceptable limits. Marcus, emboldened by what he mistook for success, decided to up his game. He began speaking in what he thought was a British accent, mocking the formality of the royal setting. "Oh, blimey, Governor," he said in an exaggerated Cockney accent. "Fancy seeing you here at the palace. Don't suppose you'd fancy a chat about the Queen, eh?" The crowd's reaction began to shift from curious amusement to visible discomfort. Several British tourists shook their heads in disapproval, and whispered conversations began about whether someone should intervene. The respect that locals held for the royal guards and the institution they represented was clearly not shared by this visiting American. Unknown to Marcus, his behavior had already triggered protocols designed to protect both the guards and the palace. Security officers positioned throughout the grounds had been monitoring the situation from the moment he stepped out of the designated tourist areas. Radio communications crackled quietly as personnel updated each other on the developing situation. Marcus pulled out his phone's selfie mode and attempted to take a picture with the motionless guard. As he positioned himself next to Lance Corporal Mitchell, he made peace signs and silly expressions, treating the solemn military figure like a prop in his personal photo shoot. This crossed another line in royal protocol, as touching or positioning oneself inappropriately near the guards was strictly forbidden. "This is going to get me so many likes," Marcus muttered to himself, completely absorbed in documenting his rule-breaking adventure. He failed to notice the subtle changes happening around him. The way other security personnel had begun moving closer, the increased radio chatter among the police officers, and the growing tension in the crowd of observers. The guard remained professional despite the escalating situation, but Marcus's behavior was about to cross from merely inappropriate to genuinely problematic. What started as a tourist's misguided attempt at entertainment was rapidly developing into a serious breach of royal security protocols, and the consequences would be swift and decisive. As Marcus prepared for his next provocative move, he had no idea that his antics had already sealed his fate. The wheels of royal security were in motion, and his European vacation was about to take a dramatic turn that would leave him with a very different story to tell his friends back home. Feeling increasingly confident that he had found the perfect viral content, Marcus decided to take his antics to the next level. He had noticed that despite his increasingly disruptive behavior, the guard hadn't moved or acknowledged him in any way. In his social media-obsessed mind, this meant he needed to do something even more outrageous to get the reaction he was seeking. "All right, let's see what happens when I do this," Marcus announced to his phone camera, speaking as if he were hosting his own reality show. What he did next would prove to be the critical mistake that transformed his tourist prank from merely inappropriate to potentially dangerous in the eyes of royal security. Marcus reached out and actually touched the guard's rifle. He placed his hand on the weapon while grinning at his camera, completely unaware that he had just committed a serious security violation. In that instant, he had crossed from being an annoying tourist to being perceived as a potential threat to royal security. Lance Corporal Mitchell could no longer ignore the situation under any interpretation of his duties. The moment Marcus's hand made contact with the military weapon, everything changed. Lance Corporal Mitchell's training kicked in automatically. With lightning speed that shocked everyone watching, the guard came to life. His voice boomed across the palace forecourt with an authority that made nearby tourists jump in surprise. "Stand back from the Queen's Guard," Mitchell shouted with the full power of his military training. The command echoed off the palace walls and caused an immediate hush to fall over the entire crowd. Marcus stumbled backward, his phone nearly slipping from his suddenly shaking hands. The confident smile vanished from his face as he realized that his harmless prank had triggered something far more serious than he had anticipated. But the guard wasn't finished. Mitchell took a sharp step forward, his rifle now held in a more ready position, though still within proper protocol. "Make way for the Queen's Guard," he commanded again, his voice carrying the weight of military authority that had been earned through years of service and training. The crowd of tourists scattered like leaves in the wind, creating a wide circle around Marcus and the guard. Marcus stood frozen, his mouth hanging open in shock. This wasn't the gentle breaking of character he had hoped to film. This was a professional soldier asserting his authority and making it crystal clear that boundaries had been crossed. The Hawaiian-shirted tourist suddenly looked very small and very foolish, standing alone in the open space that had formed around them. The other guards at nearby posts remained motionless, but alert. Their training taught them that when one guard responds to a situation, the others maintain their positions unless specifically ordered to assist. However, their awareness of the situation was evident in the subtle shift of their posture and the increased alertness in their stance. Marcus tried to regain his composure, holding up his hands in what he hoped was a peaceful gesture. "Hey, sorry, man, I was just trying to get a cool video," he said, his voice now much quieter and lacking the confident bravado he had displayed just moments earlier. But his apology fell on deaf ears, as Lance Corporal Mitchell maintained his authoritative stance. The crowd that had initially been amused by Marcus's antics now watched with a mixture of embarrassment and concern. Several British tourists shook, their heads in disapproval, clearly mortified by the American's behavior. Parents pulled their children closer, sensing that the situation had become unpredictable and potentially unsafe. What Marcus didn't realize was that touching the guard's weapon had triggered automatic security protocols throughout the palace complex. In secure areas of the building, alarms had been activated, and additional security personnel were already mobilizing. The incident was being recorded by multiple security cameras, and reports were being filed that would follow Marcus long after he left the palace grounds. Within seconds of the guard's commanding shouts, plainclothes security officers began appearing from various points around the palace perimeter. They had been stationed strategically throughout the tourist areas, dressed like ordinary visitors but trained to respond quickly to exactly this type of situation. Their sudden appearance made it clear to everyone, including Marcus, that this was far from over. The American tourist looked around desperately, finally beginning to understand that his quest for social media fame had led him into serious trouble. The respectful distance that tourists normally maintained from the guards wasn't just tradition or politeness. It was a security requirement that he had violated in the most direct way possible. As security personnel closed in from multiple directions, Marcus realized that his European vacation had just taken a turn that no amount of followers or likes could make worthwhile. The price of his viral video attempt was about to become very real and very expensive. Within 30 seconds of Marcus touching the guard's rifle, 4 plainclothes security officers materialized from the crowd like ghosts becoming solid. These weren't ordinary police constables, but specialized royal protection officers trained, specifically for situations involving potential threats to royal security. They moved with practiced efficiency, surrounding Marcus before he fully understood what was happening. "Sir, please put your hands where we can see them and step away from the guard," commanded the lead officer, a stern-faced woman in her 40s who had appeared beside Marcus as if from nowhere. Her tone was professional but left no room for negotiation. The other 3 officers positioned themselves strategically, cutting off any possible escape routes while maintaining a professional demeanor that somehow felt more intimidating than outright aggression. Marcus's hands trembled as he held them up, his phone still clutched in his right hand. "Look, I'm really sorry," he stammered, his voice now barely above a whisper. "I didn't know I wasn't supposed to touch anything. I'm just a tourist." The confidence and bravado that had fueled his earlier behavior had completely evaporated, replaced by growing panic as he began to comprehend the seriousness of his situation. The lead security officer stepped closer, her keen eyes assessing Marcus for any signs that he might be carrying weapons or pose a continuing threat. "Sir, you need to understand that you have just interfered with a military sentry and made physical contact with a service weapon. This is a very serious matter." Her words hit Marcus like a physical blow as he realized that his social media stunt had crossed into territory with genuine legal consequences. Meanwhile, Lance Corporal Mitchell had returned to his post and resumed his motionless stance, though he remained more alert than before. His swift and decisive response had been textbook perfect, demonstrating exactly why these guards were chosen for their combination of ceremonial duties and practical security functions. The other tourist had backed away significantly, creating a large clear space around the unfolding incident. The security team worked with practiced coordination. While the lead officer spoke with Marcus, another officer was already reviewing footage from the security cameras that monitored every inch of the palace grounds. A third officer was communicating through a nearly invisible earpiece, relaying information to the Central Security Command Center located deep within the palace complex. "We're going to need you to come with us," the lead officer informed Marcus, her tone making it clear that this was not a request. "You'll need to provide identification and answer some questions about your actions here today." Marcus felt his stomach drop as he realized that his morning of fun had transformed into what was beginning to feel like an arrest situation. "Can I call someone?" Marcus asked desperately, thinking of the American Embassy contact information he had been given during his travel preparation. "I'm an American citizen. Don't I get to make a phone call or something?" His voice carried a note of panic that made several nearby tourists look away in embarrassment for him. The security officer's expression softened slightly, but remained professionally firm. "All of your rights will be explained to you, sir. Right now, we need to secure the situation and ensure there are no further security concerns." As she spoke, additional uniformed Metropolitan Police officers began arriving at the scene, having been summoned as part of the standard protocol for security incidents at royal locations. Marcus watched in growing horror as more and more official personnel appeared. What had started as what he thought was a harmless prank was now involving multiple levels of British law enforcement. He could see tourists in the crowd pointing at him and taking pictures, though none with the admiring expressions he had hoped his social media stunt would generate. The lead security officer extended her hand toward Marcus's phone. "We'll need to secure your recording device as evidence," she said firmly. This request hit Marcus harder than anything else that had happened. His phone contained not just the video of today's incident, but 3 weeks' worth of vacation photos, contacts, and personal information. "You can't take my phone," Marcus protested, clutching it closer to his chest. "I need it to contact the embassy, and it has all my travel information." But even as he spoke, he could see in the officer's expression that he had very little choice in the matter. His phone had recorded evidence of a security incident at one of Britain's most important government buildings. As the security team prepared to escort him away from the palace grounds, Marcus caught sight of his reflection in one of the palace windows. The confident, fun-loving American tourist who had approached the guard just minutes earlier was gone, replaced by a frightened young man who was beginning to understand that actions have consequences, especially when those actions involve royal security. The crowd of tourists watched in fascination and horror as Marcus was led away, many of them undoubtedly thinking about their own behavior and whether they had ever come close to crossing similar lines during their travels. His Hawaiian shirt, which had seemed so bright and cheerful that morning, now looked garish and inappropriate as he walked between the security officers toward an uncertain fate. Marcus found himself in a sterile interview room at Belgravia Police Station, just a few blocks from Buckingham Palace. The reality of his situation was beginning to sink in as he sat across from Detective Inspector Sarah Williams, a seasoned officer who specialized in cases involving royal security breaches. The room was nothing like the dramatic interrogation scenes he had seen in movies. Just a plain table, uncomfortable chairs, and fluorescent lighting that made everything look harsh and unwelcoming. "Mr. Thompson," Detective Inspector Williams began, consulting a file that seemed surprisingly thick for an incident that had occurred just 2 hours earlier. "You've been arrested under the Public Order Act for behavior likely to cause harassment, alarm, or distress, and under the Official Secrets Act for interfering with military personnel performing their duties. Do you understand the seriousness of these charges?" Marcus's mouth went dry as he heard the formal language describing his actions. "I honestly just thought I was having some fun," he said weakly. "I didn't realize touching the rifle was such a big deal. I mean, they're just standing there for tourists to look at, right?" His words sounded pathetic even to his own ears, and he could see from the detective's expression that his explanation wasn't helping his case. Detective Inspector Williams leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Thompson, those guards are active military personnel carrying loaded weapons while protecting one of the most important buildings in the United Kingdom. They're not tourist attractions or props for your entertainment. Lance Corporal Mitchell has served 2 combat tours in Afghanistan. His weapon is not a toy, and his position is not ceremonial theater." The weight of this information hit Marcus, like a physical blow. In his social media-obsessed mindset, he had reduced real people with serious responsibilities to mere content for his online presence. The guard he had harassed wasn't just a costumed performer, but a trained soldier with real authority and genuine responsibilities. "What happens now?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The confident American tourist who had started the day planning to create viral content was gone, replaced by a frightened young man facing the consequences of his actions in a foreign country. "That depends on several factors," the detective replied, consulting her notes. "The security footage shows clear evidence of your actions, and we have statements from multiple witnesses. Your behavior escalated over approximately 15 minutes, during which you were given multiple opportunities to maintain appropriate distance and conduct yourself respectfully." Marcus realized that every moment of his confrontation with the guard had been recorded by sophisticated security systems designed to protect the royal family and their residences. There would be no disputing what had happened, no way to claim misunderstanding or blame cultural differences for his behavior. "The American Embassy has been contacted," Detective Inspector Williams continued, "and they've confirmed your identity. However, they've also made it clear that while they'll ensure you receive fair treatment under British law, they cannot and will not interfere with legal proceedings resulting from violations of British security laws." This news crushed Marcus's last hope that his American citizenship might somehow protect him from consequences. He had assumed that being a tourist would grant him some sort of immunity, or at least sympathy, but he was learning that disrespecting royal security was taken seriously, regardless of one's nationality or intentions. The detective slid a document across the table. "You're being charged with a public order offense, which typically results in a fine and possible community service. However, the security violation charge is more serious. Because you made physical contact with a military weapon while interfering with a guard's duties, you're looking at possible jail time, deportation, and a permanent ban from entering the United Kingdom." Marcus stared at the official papers in disbelief. A permanent ban from the UK would affect not just future vacation plans, but potentially his career opportunities. His social media marketing job occasionally required international travel, and having a criminal record in a major allied country could impact his professional future in ways he was only beginning to understand. "Can I post bail or something?" Marcus asked desperately. "I have a flight back to Chicago in 3 days. I've already paid for my hotel, and I have a job to get back to." The mundane concerns of his normal life seemed surreal in the context of facing criminal charges in a foreign country. Detective Inspector Williams shook her head. "You'll be appearing before a magistrate tomorrow morning. They'll determine whether you'll be released pending further proceedings or held in custody. Given that you're a foreign national with no ties to the UK, flight risk is definitely a concern." As the reality of potentially spending time in a British jail cell sank in, Marcus finally understood the true cost of his viral video attempt. His quest for social media fame had not only failed spectacularly, but had also put his freedom, his future travel opportunities, and his professional reputation at serious risk. The 15 minutes of foolish behavior at Buckingham Palace were going to have consequences that would follow him for years to come. 3 months later, Marcus Thompson sat in his small Chicago apartment staring at his laptop screen where a news article about tourist behavior at royal sites was displayed. The incident at Buckingham Palace had indeed become the viral content he had sought, but not in any way he could have imagined. Videos of his confrontation with the royal guard had been shared thousands of times across social media platforms, but instead of admiration for his boldness, the comments were filled with criticism of his disrespectful behavior and embarrassment that he represented American tourists abroad. The magistrate's court hearing had been a sobering experience that Marcus would never forget. Standing before Judge Margaret Henley, he had listened as the prosecution outlined his violations of British law and the potential security implications of his actions. The judge's words still echoed in his mind. "Mr. Thompson, your behavior demonstrates a concerning lack of respect for British institutions and a dangerous disregard for security protocols designed to protect both the public and our national heritage." In the end, Marcus had been sentenced to a $2,000 fine, 40 hours of community service to be completed during his remaining time in London, and a 5-year ban from visiting any royal properties in the United Kingdom. While he had avoided jail time, the financial and personal costs of his actions had been substantial. The fine had depleted his savings, the extended stay in London to complete his community service had cost him his job, and the criminal record had complicated his future travel plans significantly. The community service had been perhaps the most educational part of his punishment. He had been assigned to work with a veterans charity in London, helping former military personnel transition to civilian life. Through conversations with these men and women who had served their country with honor and dignity, Marcus began to understand the real meaning of the respect and protocol he had violated at Buckingham Palace. One veteran in particular, a former Coldstream Guard named Robert Hayes, had taken the time to explain the significance of the ceremonial duties Marcus had disrupted. "Those lads standing guard aren't just there for show," Hayes had told him during a break from sorting donated clothes. "They're representing centuries of military tradition and service. When you mock them, you're mocking every person who ever wore that uniform and served their country." The conversation had been a turning point for Marcus, helping him understand that his actions had been about more than just breaking tourist rules. He had shown disrespect for an institution that many people held sacred, and had treated a professional soldier like a carnival attraction for his own entertainment. Upon returning to Chicago, Marcus had found that the viral nature of his palace incident had preceded him. Potential employers Googled his name during job interviews and found videos of his confrontation with the Royal Guard. The social media marketing skills he had once been proud of now seemed tainted by the very public example of his poor judgment and cultural insensitivity. Eventually, Marcus found work with a smaller company that was willing to look past his viral notoriety, but at a significantly lower salary than he had previously earned. The financial impact of his 15 minutes of foolish behavior at Buckingham Palace continued to affect his daily life months later. The experience had changed Marcus's perspective on travel, social media, and respect for other cultures in ways he never could have anticipated. He found himself cringing when he saw other tourists behaving disrespectfully at monuments or cultural sites, understanding now how such behavior affected not just the immediate situation, but the reputation of all visitors from their home country. Marcus had initially planned to delete all traces of his palace incident from his social media accounts, but he ultimately decided to leave them up as a reminder of the lessons he had learned. He added a lengthy caption to the videos explaining his regret for his actions and encouraging other travelers to treat cultural sites and local customs with respect. The 5-year ban from royal properties meant that Marcus's dream of visiting Scotland's royal castles or returning to see other British historical sites would have to wait. But more importantly, the incident had taught him that true travel experiences came from understanding and respecting the places and people he visited, not from treating them as props for his online persona. As he closed his laptop and prepared for another day at his new job, Marcus reflected on how a single moment of poor judgment had changed the trajectory of his life. The royal guard he had taunted had stood his ground and done his duty, while Marcus had learned a costly lesson about respect, consequences, and the real price of viral fame. The guard had returned to his post that day with his dignity intact, while Marcus would be living with the consequences of his actions for years to come.